Welcome to the Journos on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm Peter Martin. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the football family. And today, the Journos, Hugh McDonald, Michael Grant and Tam Cowan with me to discuss all the burning issues, not only in Scotland, but to Europe and globally as well. From the ashes of Michael Beale, who can rekindle the fire at Rangers? We'll discuss the runners and riders. 40 years on from Gothenburg, we thought it was great to get Michael Grant to try and pick his second best Aberdeen 11, because we all know what his ultimate 11 is. What's gone wrong at Manchester United since Sir Alex Ferguson left? Some of the signings and the managers trying to, well, recapture the glory days. They haven't been able to do it. And with Fergie in mind, who is the greatest football manager of all time? Not a bad few topics to kick us all off. Michael Beale, no great surprise, Michael, to be honest with you. He was dead man walking, from game to game.
Yeah, it looked that way. Certainly the fans' reaction after some of the recent games was just incredibly toxic towards him, even when they won. When they beat Motherwell, the fans were so unimpressed by the performance. No disrespect to Motherwell, obviously, but they just didn't play that well. And so they booed them that day. But I think the one that really was a turning point was losing the game to Celtic. It was a weakened Celtic without some of their key defenders. There was a feeling really that it was a kind of, if they're not going to beat them now, they'll never get a better chance kind of thing. And Rangers didn't really lay a glove on them, and it was immediately after they'd lost to PSV Eindhoven to go to the Champions League. It was a hellish 4 days for Beale, and I think that was the point of no return almost,
Yeah, and with that in mind, I have to look back over the 307 days and ask the question, Hugh, were Rangers duped into an appointment of a man that really was ill-equipped for such a huge job?
I don't know about duped, but I think most people would have thought at the time, and I know some people inside the Rangers board thought at the time, that the appointment had been, shall we say, maybe not premature, but not rigorously sort of interviews and due diligence done. It was a very quick and easy appointment for him. To me, it was as if it was an obvious appointment, to which people on the outside would say, well, why are you appointing a guy that's only managerial experience is just losing the last 5 games at Queen's Park, Rangers, who's not got any great managerial experience, and he's coming into a job which, whatever else it demands a manager, rather than a coach. You've got to be a man of some substance to take on those roles because of the non-football side of it. I mean, everything goes down to football, everything goes down to results. But the pressure on a manager in Glasgow, Celtic and Rangers is huge. I always go back to Peter, Gordon Strachan walking up the stairs at Celtic a couple of weeks into his appointment. I remember he'd been a manager at Coventry and at Southampton, taken to an FA Cup final in the Premier League, and I said to him, how are you finding it here? And he says, finding it here? He says, this is me going up for my 5th press conference of the day. He says, we never got this at Southampton. He says, it's mad. It's good. This is a guy who had a real appreciation of not only management but of the Scottish dimension. So I think the Rangers process, and this is what I think has got to be really interesting now, is Rangers' process was completely and utterly flawed. Beale could have worked out, say, but that wouldn't have meant the process was good. The actual recruitment process was flawed.
The other thing about it, Tam, which we do, and we're all guilty of it because it's the nature of your job, you've got to hang on people's every word, you've got to dissect it and analyse what they're saying, and then eventually what you have to do is sift through a lot of managers, PR, spin, excuses that come in. He didn't want to have any loan signings. Suddenly a couple of weeks later there were loan signings in. He was going to spend, and build his own team, and suddenly from the directors and the board, they were putting out the message that this is what the player cost, and then he contests that. So suddenly you've got you've got one end of the board saying one thing, he's saying the other, and the ultimate thing that Hugh's just touched on there, the results were killing him.
The results, the bottom line was, if you go back to that Motherwell game that Michael mentioned, you'll see many a time where teams maybe don't perform, but they still get the win, they still get the 3 points. You think, right, we got away with that one. But there was not a sense of that at all for the Rangers fans, particularly. they watched what happened that day. I know for a fact I had never seen Motherwell have as much of the play at Ibrox since about 1994, I think it was. You had, I think, the Rangers goalie getting booked for time wasting at home to Motherwell. You had the players taking the ball into the corner flags against Motherwell. The Rangers fans were never ever going to settle for that. You know, and in terms of when they brought him in, you know, there was quite a few people in and out of football who it seems may have been taken in by the line about he was the brains behind the Steven Gerrard era, you know, and you know, the minute folk took that on board, they thought, right, this is maybe a good guy that we've got. I'm imagining that Michael Beale wouldn't have been hard to deal with when he came back to Rangers in his own right. But the worrying thing is now, if I was a Rangers fan, there's no doubt he was backed by the board.
Yeah.
I know they had a wee bit of, they were quoting different figures, it seemed, as you mentioned there, Peter, but he was backed by the board, and you think, if these guys aren't good enough now, you know, guys like Dessers, you know, who just... It just strikes me that's one of the names that in years to come you're going to look back, and even Rangers fans will have a slight kind of grimace about that and think, well, you remember that era. He just doesn't look as if he's going to do it, and it's a hell of a lot of money they spent on him. So what happens to these guys now, irrespective of who they bring in?
Well, the ultimate thing is whoever comes in, Michael, he just has to go with what he's got, and what he's got, you know, the figures we're now getting is that the net spend overall was £5 million. Before you got to that, you had a situation or a narrative being put out there that Rangers had a huge amount of money to spend. He already went out in a press conference and said, I'm happy with the budget that I've got, and it's sufficient to do the job, which is effectively win the title off Celtic.
Yeah, I mean, I think when everybody saw that the signings weren't that good, you know, he began to put out this new narrative, kind of diluting how much we'd actually spent on these guys to get them in. You know, the next manager that comes in, maybe he'll get a tune out of some of these guys. Maybe, you know, a better manager might get more out of them, but he's never going to make Sam Lammers quicker. You know, listen, maybe he'll get a bit more out of Dessers, but I'm with you, Tam. I think even while they're still here, you're looking at guys like Lammers and Dessers and thinking these guys will come to symbolise a failed Rangers regime, and they probably won't last very long themselves.
Bottom line, you don't fear them. I keep saying to you, Peter, that analogy for me at Motherwell, watching the players running out for the tunnel, and you know, gone are the days you think, well, there's McCoist, I bet he scores against us there, Chris Boyd, there's him, there's that. There was no fear there, and I think the Motherwell players actually showed that. It was that thing I always thought that a good psychiatrist, a good psychologist could have had a field day with, when the fact that you can have your team playing absolutely brilliantly, and then the minute they go to either Ibrox or Parkhead, they seem to freeze, and you think the park's roughly the same dimensions, the whole object of the game is the same, stick the ball in the net. What is it about going to venues like that and they just can't handle it? Motherwell seem to dismiss all of that. When they last went to Ibrox, they looked really, really comfortable. As I say, I hadn't seen anything like it for 30 years. So it's a lot. The hang up to as well about with the way Rangers are now, they're already 7 points behind Celtic, right? They're already behind St Mirren, you know. But the 7 points already, you couldn't get a bookie in the land to take money on Celtic now. It's as if they're gone already.
The thing is, you're right, they're 7 points behind. By the end of September, they're 7 points behind. They haven't been to Parkhead, they haven't been to Pittodrie, they haven't played Hearts or Hibs at all.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're dropping points that you think if you're going to construct a title race, a title challenge all the way, these are the points that you should have got on the back.
And in terms of the timing of it as well, Peter, I mean, you know, if a guy can get a tune out of these players, whoever it is that they bring in, or even if it's just the interim appointments just now, I think it was crucial as well, because if there is such a thing as a bounce, the next couple of games, I mean, the Hearts semi-final for Rangers is absolutely crucial. With Celtic having been knocked out of that tournament, you know, before Michael Beale went, there was so many Rangers fans and open lines and football message boards saying he's got to win the League Cup, then he's got to get that bit of silverware, or else he can beat it. So there's still that pressure.
Yeah, just before we touch on who they're going to get, I mean, you dissected some of the players he'd signed. I mean, Danilo was a bit unlucky, he picked up an injury, but he did look like the only Brazilian since Serginho that couldn't dribble or finish, on a regular basis. And £5 million is a lot of money to shell out in somebody, and you're looking for a little spark from them. The other aspect of this that I'm looking at from his point of view, was he helped by a board that, at times dithered on things like, I mean, he must have advised him on the Kent and Morelos situation. That, along with injuries, did not help. Morelos was a poor professional, I have to be honest with you, but Kent and Morelos walked out the door for nothing.
That was just bad business. I mean, the whole thing, I think, there was a sort of night of the long knives at Rangers just after the Parks went, where everybody was cleared out. And I think the sort of realisation there by Bennett was that, there's been some real big business decisions that have not been made properly. The major business decisions, like you have to get rid of players now before their contracts run out. You probably have to get rid of them before the last year of the contract as well. I think the model would be sign them for 4 years, get 2 years out of them, and then in the last 2 years, in those 4 windows, you're desperately trying to get them out. Sooner the better.
And you know what, Hugh, the bottom line is, I know that we all laughed at it, and I don't even know who it was that came up with the figure originally, but bear in mind at one point, the figure of £40 million was bandied about Morelos, right?
I think that was Charlie Adam.
It sounded, but it was there, it was in print somewhere, and it was in the fans' minds. But to go for that, to actually not get anything for that guy, and I know what you're saying about his professionalism and whatever it was, way looking after himself and all the rest of it, but there of course were spells where he was an absolutely brilliant player for Rangers and a great goal scorer, and for him to end up getting zip from him, that's poor management.
Well, you just have to look across the city, what's been happening in the last few weeks, and what's happened in the last few weeks is guys have been signing contracts, your Hitatis, O'Reillys, etc. signed on, and nobody is suggesting they're signing on to stay at Celtic. I mean, in the long term. What they're doing is they're signing on for better deals in the short term, with a nod to them and their agent that, see if a good bid comes in, we've upped your salary by X grand a week, and see if a good bid come in, we won't be hard to deal with because that is our model. That's the way it goes.
And it's also what you can do when you've got £72 million
exactly.
in the bank. Lawwell spoke about that in the statement, didn't he? He said this money kind of protects us in the seasons when we won't get into the Champions League, and it means we can give contracts to players to keep them rather than be cherry picked by the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great incentive for the players who've got the new deal to actually say, well, if I can really push on here and improve, I'll get a bigger deal, I'll get the big move. The only flip side to that, Michael, is the part where we finished talking about Rangers, which is they're now looking for the fourth manager, in as many years, and the selection of that manager is going to be important because you're looking for someone who can galvanise the club, can maybe look at what the academy is doing as well, because they don't have a lot of money, and if the attitude is, well, we've got to try and spend to keep pace with a club who by the time we get to January, Michael, will have £100 million in the bank and will be stonewall certainties to get the £60 million next season from the new Champions League format. So I think it's going to be, I think this one's huge, this decision on who's going to be the manager.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, at the moment, and for the last few years, really, every Rangers manager has operated under incredible and kind of relentless pressure from Celtic because they're winning the league nearly every season, and that just completely sets the temperature at Ibrox and at the Auchenhowie, and it's relentless, and it means that the fans have got a shorter patience with anything that's going wrong. So you alluded to the ruthlessness that they need to start showing about selling players. I think you're maybe seeing that in how quick they were to get rid of Beale. I mean, it's in 10 months, but they don't get managerial appointments right. 4 of the last 5 haven't lasted 85 games. Gerrard's the only one that lasted. Warburton didn't last, Caixinha didn't last, Beale didn't last, Van Bronckhorst didn't last. And the cycle they're desperately trying to get out of is losing a manager every autumn, because that's 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Gerrard was headhunted, and that's can't ask for better than that. Your manager's done well enough to get poached by somebody else. But their fear now, and rightly, is that the next manager comes in, he gets into the same cycle of losing Old Firm games, of Celtic winning the title, of stumbling in Europe. The fans are on their back. Bang. Who's the next one?
And when you're talking about, the financial gap there, Peter, history should surely tell them that they can't just go chasing Celtic, in terms of the money and the financial gap, because look what happened the last time.
I think they need major investment, Hugh. I think somebody needs to suddenly work out. I mean, it's difficult enough to deal with the banks, but somebody needs to work out an investor from somewhere. Plus, of course, there undoubtedly are people who will still be getting paid off for the investment that they've had over the last 5 years in the crusade to stop 10. And then you've got to look for a manager who comes in. And remember, by the way, off the back of this, and I think this is great credit to John Bennett, he's changed the mindset from, he's cleared out people who just wanted to pick fights with everybody. I mean, they were going to court there wasn't a month gone by without them going to court with somebody. So that mindset has changed. They're trying to build bridges. They're trying to, be less confrontational. So he's cleared out a lot of the people on the board. The PR guy was a masterstroke as well. And now they're allowing this kind of a new attitude to try and build some bridges. And of course, let's not forget the picked fights with the cinch deal as well. So this is where I think it's a slightly calmer in the background, and John Bennett will undoubtedly, his biggest task now is, one, I think, investment. Where that comes from, I do not know. But the most immediate one is it a Muscat? Is it Lampard? I mean, I read the name Frank Lampard and I'm thinking, if Rangers offer Frank Lampard the job, I mean, it's just ridiculous.
But we go back to culture again, if you were sitting down soberly, bringing in an outside sort of management firm to look at Rangers, they'd be saying, well, what you're doing is you're doing the same thing over and over again. People are talking about investment. It's not investment, Peter. It's at the very best, it's soft loans. It's people putting, people are not putting, the Parks didn't put X million in because 10 years down the line, they think that 7 million is suddenly going to be 8.5 million, and it's thus an investment.
Yeah.
It's really just it's just throwing money down a hole. And they've been doing that since time immemorial. So somebody come in and said, listen, what is our business plan here? Is our business plan just to completely and utterly just lose money every year and see where that got us before, because we have to beat Celtic?
Yeah.
And that's the culture. That's the culture all the time. I mean, if a management firm can say, right, first thing you've got to do is we'll have to get into the Europa League next year and maybe get a cup. The league's beyond us, Champions League's beyond us. This is the budget. Can you imagine explaining that to the Ibrox crowd?
I was going to say they'd be laughed out of town.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is it a more rational plan than just chasing Celtic with throwing millions and millions at a wall? Absolutely. But it's again, you get back to culture. I mean, I always thought Mark Warburton's great one when he thought the culture of the club every day, when the club got promoted to the Premier League, the Premiership, sorry. He thought everybody was on board. Everybody knew it'd be a couple of years before they had to settle down. They walked onto the park. There was this big sign going for 55.
Yes.
And he went, what?
Yeah, and therein lies the problem, Michael, because you also have what I call a generation who were brought up in a checkbook manager in Graham Souness, and they could outspend anybody, and they're difficult to appease at the best of times.
Yeah, they are. I mean, the funny thing is, in the last accounts, well, actually, Celtic's ones will be different, but there was only about £5 million of difference in the wage bills at the two clubs. Rangers was 55 million and Celtic's was about 59 million. Now, but look at the return that they get for that money. Yep. So again, Tam's point earlier on, it 100% comes down to recruitment. If you have the right players, led by the right manager, you'll get it. Look at Postecoglou's impact at Celtic.
Yeah.
From the ashes of that season. He did it like that because he signed really cleverly and astutely, and he knew a market that Celtic could afford to get from, and he knew players that would make an impact in Scotland.
And he was a coach as well.
And he coached them brilliantly. And none of that has really applied at Celtic.
And the really frustrating thing, of course, now for Rangers fans is that Postecoglou has gone, Brendan Rodgers is back, and there's no doubt that Celtic haven't looked as good as they were previous. So there'll be Rangers fans thinking, this Celtic team isn't any really great shakes, but we can't lay a glove on them. We got them when they were weakened at Ibrox and we get turned over. And even when I know, having seen Celtic run rings runners in the past, the previous Brendan Rodgers era, when I watched them against Motherwell again, they just seemed a bit flatter, but so it seems as if Celtic are sitting there and you think Rangers could make inroads, but it would need everything to come together, the manager,
Who would you give it to?
Right, well, you know what, I'm sticking with the Scottish guys, and I'll tell you why. I was reading in the Scottish Sun this week, I was reading Robert Greaves, Chris Boyd's column in the Scottish Sun, and and Chris made the very valid point that, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but he was saying about why did Rangers overlook the Scottish guys when you look at some of the duds that they brought in. Why did they maybe take a chance with Kevin Van Veen? Why did they not go for Shankland? Why did they not go for Kevin Nisbet? Now, if you agree then with what Chris says there, and I've heard as many Rangers fans saying it, then maybe look the same way with management. I know that Derek McInnes has obviously been quoted, and there's a lot of Rangers fans saying he's the only option now. He's obviously in a job at Kilmarnock, and it's not the right thing to say and all that nonsense. But then every man in their dug, certainly within the media, remembers all the stories that we were hearing about what happened when he went to see Dave King the last time, So I don't think personally that's going to happen. But then when you do look at, I'll give you the names that keep popping up. Davy Martindale. It'd be intriguing. I'd certainly, if I was a Rangers fan, I'd sooner have Davy Martindale now than Frank Lampard.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. But then you look at another, I don't know, Stevie Robinson.
Well,
Campbell. He knows the songs.
Yeah, I did. I did hear actually. Tammy Manus said there's more chance of Harry Potter than Graham Potter, and it kind of sums the whole thing up.
But hang on though. See, just to be serious with the boy, right? If we take that point on board, right, that Chris made, right, and I think Kevin Van Veen. The place for him to bang in goals was in the top flight in Scotland. That's where he would have been playing with Rangers as well. Yeah. That, you would have to say, is where he would have got more chances put on a plate from, perhaps, and they go to Motherwell. I cannot imagine that Kevin Van Veen would have failed at Rangers, right? I can't think of it at all. I thought I'm going to be sick here. He's going to go to Rangers. Well, what my point is, don't make the same mistake again. If you do think there are guys here in Scotland at managerial level who know what the club's about, who know the scene, who know that league, then, instead of taking an absolute chance where Frank Lampard or something, Stevie Robinson,
Michael, we're outside. I take Tom's point, but we're outside Ibrox interviewing the fans, and the Rangers fans are saying, "Oh, I'd like Graham Potter." That's where the ambition is, and the belief that they can attract that calibre of manager, but they can't.
They can't, and to be honest, they have no history of doing that either. Because if you look back at a kind of stellar managerial name, there's none since Walter Smith. Now, Steven Gerrard was a massive name, but not as a manager.
Yeah.
At least when Celtic took in Rodgers, this guy had recently managed Liverpool. He was at that level. Rangers have never been able to recruit at that level. Probably won't be able to do it this time either. Of the names that are doing the rounds, I'll be honest, I was guilty of thinking Kevin Muscat and kind of remembering the kind of wild man player, primitive.
I don't think he's like that as a manager, though.
You know that, but you look at his CV and you think, this guy should be getting considered seriously. Yeah. He's won titles in Australia. He's won titles a title with Yokohama. He's 50 years old. He actually more than Postecoglou, who he succeeded at Yokohama. He does know Scottish football and how it works because he had a season.
Is he available, Michael?
I think he comes out of contract at the end of the Japanese season, which is December time. And I think the indications are he'd be interested. Now, listen, that's all very kind of superficial, but to me, I think they should be speaking to him.
Yes. And will any manager, do you imagine, Hughie, and will any manager be tasked with getting the best out of the guys that are there just now?
Absolutely.
And if that was the case, are they guys of the generation, let's go back to Frank Lampard, are they guys of the generation who would admire him and who would want to play for him?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, because at the end of the day, no, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for the appointment aspect of it.
10-20% out of these guys because they think, wow, I used to absolutely adore Frank Lampard. I'm rolling my sleeves up for him.
I understand where you're coming from. It doesn't matter because at this point, like Postecoglou, it was Neil Lennon gone. It was Eddie Howe as the number one target. Postecoglou was brought in hastily, and then people said, who's Postecoglou? So there was no question of, can he get anything out of him? It was all, by the way, who is this guy? And this club have made a complete pig's ear of this with Eddie Howe. Now you're in a situation where you're saying to yourself, this club are 7 points off Celtic. You're looking for an appointment. I agree with you. I think Muscat's a good appointment on the basis, if they could get him, the Japanese season will be over. He might be able to raid that market the way Postecoglou did, and he might be able to change the mindset that you're talking about when he gets in.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, Celtic fans shouldn't sneer at if Rangers do take him, because basically his background in coaching is exactly the same as Postecoglou.
Exactly, yeah.
Not to say that he'll become the manager Postecoglou has, but it's from that exact same CV.
See, this is again, it goes back to, I mean, I'm loath to put down business proposals on football, which is such a crazy business. But you've got to have a strategy. Now, the strategy might not work out. I mean, the strategy, because of luck, because of balls hitting the post, because of referee giving the penalties, but you have to sit down and say, what do we want? What is the box that we want to fit? And what Rangers really need now is an experienced coach, right? Who knows, has coached and managed clubs for years. They can get the best out of what they've got there. I mean, Rodgers came on board as a spectacular coach. I mean, the appointment of Rodgers coming from Liverpool ultimately to Celtic. And what was the great thing about him? Not quite the signings of Scott Sinclair and that, who were tremendous. But if you remember back to the time, everybody had written certainly I had written the playing obit of Scott Brown. There was other people in that squad, I can't quite off the top of my head say that were done, dusted, they'll have to go out. Rodgers came in and didn't quite get a tune out of Scott Brown. He got an absolute symphony out of him. He got and other players. But that's what good coaches do. Yeah. That's what good coaches do. I mean, coaches come in and say, people say, I always remember when Postecoglou came in, Ralston, everybody had, and some people still do have at times he got a tune out of Ralston. Yeah. I mean, that's what you need. You need somebody who comes in and says, I'm the coach, this is it. The Frank Lampard thing is so Rangers. You say, why, if his name is Frank Lamp, why would you go to a guy that has failed in so many high-profile jobs? Why would you even entertain that? What box does he tick except the Frank Lampard box? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, you can give us your thoughts on it in the comments section below, as ever. Every week in the Journos we discuss the topics closer to home and then further afield. One topic that I was really looking forward to with Michael, because of course it's close to your heart, is Aberdeen. Is Aberdeen, because obviously, Bary Robson's want to try and change things around and get a bit of success. But this year, of all years, it becomes painful for a certain generation when they look back 40 years and the anniversary all this year of not only winning the European Cup Winners' Cup, but let's not forget the two stars winning the Super Cup as well. That Aberdeen side of 40 years ago, and I was lucky enough to be with them for the first of their big events. My God, it was just rippling with fantastic Scottish talent, Michael.
Yeah, exactly. And the truly great sides, Rangers, Celtic, Aberdeen, United, they're full of those kind of characters, aren't they? There is real strength, and you see it at all levels, don't you? It's not just talent; there's character and mental strength and all the rest of it. To be honest, Aberdeen are going pretty decent these days compared to some of the, I'll watch my language, but some of the mediocrity that they've had to put up with over the last 20 years, certainly.
Yeah, easily.
The beginning of this, around the 2000s was just absolutely grim. I was looking at it the other night for something else. They didn't reach a cup semi-final from 2000 to 2008, let alone a final, let alone win anything. Didn't reach a semi,
Yeah.
And they were also Rans. They were, piddling away at the wrong end of the league season after season after season. So they are stronger now, and the kind of finances have kind of lifted them up the table, and they're signing better players. But having said all of that, Robson was on a bit of a sticky wicket up until just really 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
The European result, or you even getting beaten Europe, but the performance, and then going to Rangers was, people forget that because obviously the Beale is the story.
Yeah.
But Robson, was in the back of a right few bad results.
And the interesting thing, and this goes back to Tam's point about Motherwell playing against them, Robson went to Ibrox with a game plan, and okay, there was a couple of Rangers chances, and if they scored it becomes a different game if they go 1 or 2-0 up, but they didn't, and he probably kind of gambled that they wouldn't because the Rangers can't finish.
Yes.
So sure enough, half an hour into the game, the crowd starts to turn. You can feel it. We've all been there umpteen times. You can feel it when the crowd starts to turn. The players start to suddenly get jittery. They start to make mistakes. Aberdeen starts to come out into the game. They start to grow. They start to build moves themselves. They score 1-0. And you think, this game is this could go Robson's way, and it did.
Yeah. The only difference I would say, Michael, which I can give you from a real insight, and I don't know if you did it yourself, Tam, but when I was a young guy going up in a supporters bus, and you were watching Aberdeen, Celtic could go a goal up at half time, and you'd still think, I wonder if Celtic can get a draw here. because the master, Sir Alex Ferguson, would be in at half time and say, right, the game plan is we'll manage to ride out the storm, we're only a goal behind, now you get out there and work your magic, give the ball to him, and then eventually Aberdeen would come out and win 2-1.
It's extraordinary times. I mean, we're going to talk about great managers later on. I always think one of the things about a great manager, he has to get into the argument, he has to outpunch. Well, he has to do something that has not been done before. I think that would be one of my first criteria. And what Ferguson did is, 40 years ago, beating Real Madrid and Bayern Munich to win trophies is outstanding. But the thing that most people of my generation will remember about that is not quite that, though that was, stellar, was the way that he changed the conversation in Scotland.
Yeah.
He came down. Ferguson will say it himself all the time, he came to Glasgow to win.
Yeah, but the other thing he did very, very well, Hugh, which I don't think, and it goes back to what Tam's talking about, to a lesser extent now, because there are good available players that they could have snapped up, a Van Veen, a Nisbet, a Shanklin. And the thing is this, Fergie had a strategy at Aberdeen that he also had at St Mirren, and he took to Manchester United, which was this: get the scouts in the places, and the remit is get down to Glasgow and tell these guys that they'll get a game up here. Come up here. He picked the best of them from Glasgow, and he had galvanised the people that were already there at Pittodrie. And it's not a difficult blueprint. And then he managed to do what all great managers do. Football is about that spine. Good goalie, two great centre-halves, middle of the park, rock solid, and then sprinkle it with gold dust. It's a simple process. Sir Matt Busby did it at Manchester United all those years ago. Jock Stein did it as well. Brian Clough especially did it with John Robertson in that side at Nottingham Forest. And Liverpool had it. That sprinkling of gold dust. And that's what Fergie managed to do. He went down and picked out players from the west of Scotland, Michael, brought them up there and said, right, by the way, they all hate you.
Yeah, he did. No, absolutely, he did. He did change that mindset and the kind of. It was funny, if you speak to Rangers and Celtic players from that era, they talked about how they would expect Aberdeen to kind of crumble, in cup finals and even title races in the late 70s, kind of pre-Fergie. And it happened famously in the 78 final when Aberdeen were a superb side that season under Billy McNeil, but they just froze on the day of the cup final. And they lost to a Rangers side they should have really beaten. And that was McNeil's last day before he went back to Celtic. And Ferguson came in, and that's what he changed, basically. They did lose their first couple of finals under him, but they never lost another one. And famously, that's what that side was synonymous with, wasn't it? Its mentality and aggression and just absolute refusal to kind of bow to the old firm.
And the other thing I was thinking about, absolutely, and all those things, but I remember a few years ago when Aberdeen were chasing the Ronnie Dyla team in the league, and it was stuttering towards the end, and somebody on Twitter, I think Ash Taylor and somebody else was in centre defence, for Aberdeen, and somebody said if Miller and McLeish had been in centre back, we would have won the league. And I was tempted to say, yeah, if Miller and McLeish now at 55 years of age had been in the team, you would have won the league.
Yeah.
And I think that in many ways, not with likes of Michael and that, people forget how good an Aberdeen team that is. There was an argument then, and I remember it because I wasn't an Aberdeen fan. I was looking on it as sometimes as in certainly domestic terms as an adversary, very much a supporter in Europe, but looking quite clinically at their team. And I think people forget. I mean, I think that Miller and McLeish were the best centre backs in Europe. The best centre back pairing in Europe. Now imagine saying that now about a Scottish Premiership centre back. They're the two best in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think, whether I'm right or wrong, there was an argument for that.
Definitely.
Yeah. I was just going to say to you, Tam, I'm going to get Michael to pick his, possibly the second best 11, but I give you the Dons fans voted just over 1,000 of it. I think it was the last few years about the greatest ever 11, and I think depending on who you get in that 1,000, granted, here's something that's relevant to you, especially with Motherwell, and when you look at the greatest ever teams, and it's not something that I think I'm going to be critical of Aberdeen, but you would struggle in the last 20 years to put a player into anybody's greatest ever 11, because the standard has dropped so much that I think you'd struggle to even justify one player from Rangers, Celtic, Aberdeen, Motherwell in what you would call your greatest ever 11. The Dons fans only a few years ago have picked Leighton, Kennedy, Miller, McLeish, Russell Anderson, Strachan, Bett, Jess, Simpson, Harper and Shearer. I mean, I looked at that side and I thought, okay, it's a good side.
Who told Doug Rugby, wasn't he?
Tom, I looked at that side and I thought, okay, I can understand you might have ran into a few 25-year-olds along the way. Yeah. It's not a side that I would have picked.
I know, that's the thing, but see, if you use Motherwell as an example, and you're right, because Motherwell fans' greatest ever team, you'd probably go back to 91 and work your way almost backwards, but there would be just as many folk who would say the aforementioned Kevin Van Veen, for all the records that he broke and everything at the club, that he might justifiably get in there, but whenever they do these things, and if you recall when we were both involved with the Motherwell one all those years ago, there's always going to be, I think these things by nature are designed just to get you blether in the pub and get you arguing and all.
The only thing I can't give Michael the now's a pint of beer. I mean, that's the joy of these things, Michael, isn't it?
You tell me.
Here's one right away. Mark McGee, an old friend of the show, of course. Mark McGee, I don't know what that is. It's again, maybe that's the passing of time. Folk immediately think of Mark McGee and they think of manager and they think of some of the stupid stuff that happened and all that, and Floyd's even with the Aberdeen fans. But what a player Mark McGee was,
By the way, can I just say, people are talking about that. What a player Steve Archibald was.
I know.
And I had him in the second 11.
Well, I was just glancing at your second team there, and it's outstanding. And I mean, not to kind of change the mood slightly, but I mean, Frank McDougall, who obviously
fantastic,
is a genuine contender. I mean,
it's a great point, Michael.
Frank McDougall was.
And not on sentiment, by the way. Absolute clarity.
100%. And really, sadly, his career finished prematurely because he had back injuries, but I mean, this was a guy who scored 4 against Celtic in a game and a hat-trick against Rangers in the same year, January and November.
And if you speak to Fergie, he waxes lyrical about him as well. He loved Frank McDougall. Hugh, the second 11, and it's obviously we'll get the ultimate from Michael. Based on what that 1,000 fans picked, had Bobby Clark, Cooper, Rugby, Buchan, McMaster, Scanlon, Simpson, Black and Peter Weir, because I loved Scanlon, I thought he was a great player, and McGee and Archibald, and notable mentions Ian Jess, Zoltan Varga, Hewitt and Dougie Bell. Dougie Bell was a really skillful player, and of course Frank McDougall's a great point from Michael.
I think the ones I've got to talk about there are is Martin Buchan. I think people forget how good a player. I always remember going to Celtic Park once with nothing each draw. Good Celtic team, good Aberdeen team, and watching Martin Buchan, who was just absolutely imperious the whole afternoon, just imperious. The other one I would mention is Peter Weir. I once listened to Alec Ferguson talking about his Aberdeen team and saying how every now and again Weir just won the match for them, and you had to have players like that, that when you weren't playing well, you had a player that could just win the match. Zoltan Varga came here because of difficulties over situation, corruption / gambling problems in Hungary.
Dancing around this
Yeah, absolutely.
He came, and it was incredible to watch. It was just like a ghost in the park.
See, for me, it was always John McMaster with the left foot. Some of the passes, like from left back to right wing, you know, just absolutely beautiful
I'll be
play.
honest, Vraga was just a bit before my time, and I've literally never seen him play. There doesn't seem to be any footage of Vraga.
you're right.
But he left Aberdeen to join Ajax as Cruyff's replacement.
Yes.
I mean, that's the level that you're talking about. You're talking about the decline in Scottish football.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is Ajax signing Cruyff's replacement from Aberdeen.
Yeah.
I remember, see when the team, when that great Aberdeen came, it's one of my happy memories. Even watching Motherwell getting thumped, but it was just after the semi-final in '83 when they beat in the semi. Who was it?
83.
Cup Winners' Cup
The
final.
Belgian team.
Watershed.
Oh, Watershed.
Right?
Yeah.
And then between that and going to the final, they obviously had probably, I'm guessing, a backlog of league games and that, and they came to Fir Park, and it was like a beautiful kind of late spring evening. And I always remember this great Aberdeen team. They came out, it wasn't if any of them were rested or anything like that, because they had a European final to play in. They came out, it was all your household names as they were by that point, and they get a guard of honour from Motherwell, and they get applauded onto the park by Motherwell fans. It's what Hughie was saying, as much as you've got the domestic rivalry, there are always teams that you really go behind as a Scottish football fan in Europe. And when they came out that night, honestly, just pinging the ball about, they were absolutely incredible. They won 3-0 that night, and they got applauded back off the pitch by the Motherwell fans as well, as if to good luck in the final, you know, and they were great to watch. What a team.
The great thing, and I know you were wondering about it, Michael, why have these two on, but I'll tell you now, he's telling you the back catalogue of Zoltan Varga, which I'd never ever have grasped until he's told me there was a wee bit of jiggery pokery in the background, and he tells you what the weather was like in a game. I can't even remember. All I can remember is going up to Pittodrie, getting pumped, and heading back down the road and thinking, wow, they were great. Yeah, absolutely. So I look at this team, and I only did it.
Give us your team again. Give us it again.
I only put this team together in opposition to what they had selected. The ultimate 11 is far stronger.
Wait a minute. Start with Michael. Go back to the one that was voted for by the 1,000 fans. I want Michael to tell me the glaring omission, because there must be. Even a sentimental one like you.
The thing is, if you're talking about a glaring omission, then you know you're arguing again. Like, I would say Neil Cooper should be in that because he was in the Gothenburg midfield. But I mean, Jess and Bet were outstanding footballers. You know. But you know, the team I wrote down.
This is the one we want. This is the one we want.
I carry this bit of paper with me.
Just a resignation player. Magnus Llewellyn.
But I mean, this on the assumption that you didn't want the Gothenburg team. So I put Snelders in goal.
Snelders, great shout.
Favourite of mine. He was a fantastic Aberdeen goalkeeper. All right, his popularity maybe dimmed for where he went after Aberdeen, but a fantastic goal.
So wait a minute, you think he's better than Leighton?
No, but my remit was not to have the Gothenburg team.
No, not to have
sorry.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because I think if you talk about the Gothenburg team, it's kind of obvious, isn't it?
And it's hard to push anyone out of it.
It's really hard to push out anybody. You know, you could maybe argue for Harper going in because of the volume of goals he scored, or McDougall or Shearer. You know, Kennedy Kennedy didn't play. Gothenburg famous injured. Martin Buchan, Russell Anderson, you know, no disrespect to Russell, he's obviously not in Miller and McLeish's class, but he was an iconic modern era Aberdeen captain and a strong leader. David Robertson, I thought, was an outstanding left back.
Yeah, absolutely, I forgot all about David Robertson.
My midfield's the same as that one there, Jess and Bet. I'm putting Dougie Bell in because I'm pally with Dougie.
Yeah, that's a good reason.
and he missed Gothenburg when there's a reasonable chance he'd have played in that night. It certainly would have featured, you know. And I've gone with the front three. I've gone with Frank McDougall. I think there's a massive case for Hans Hillhouse. I think there's a strong argument for Charlie Nick. But I've gone for McDougall, I've gone for Harper, and I've gone for Stevie Archibald, because Archibald was obviously left in about 80, just before the Gothenburg era, really. But what a player Stevie Archibald, and what
fantastic.
a career he had. I mean, Barcelona, Spurs, and revered at all three clubs, big fans.
If you go to Barcelona, they call him Archie Gall. You know, it's just amazing. Yeah, it's a great shout, because obviously I was well aware of the fact that the Gothenburg team, it's hard to take one or two out of it. And of course,
I'm quite sad though that poor Michael, it's just really all about nostalgia now. He came alive there talking about the guys.
As you get older, you forget modern stuff and you remember what happened in the past. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, can I just say something to you? As we head to the end of this programme, let me just put things in perspective for people who think, four guys all talking about the old days. For the modern generation, even to look back and think Johnny Metcalf was top drawer, Stilica was in the Germany side, he was absolutely fantastic as well. Camacho also in that side, and Del Bosque. And then if you look towards the Bayern Munich side, that they beat in the quarterfinals, Augenthaler was outstanding. Breitner was a World Cup winner from 74.
Second best right back in the world in 74.
Well, thank you for that. Dremler, Hoeneß, Rummenigge. I mean, it's such a fantastic
Rummenigge was
side.
the star, wasn't he?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm sure we would run out of time talking about Manchester United, so I thought I'd go to the more familiar one, and probably a little bit more fun for everybody to indulge in, which is who is the greatest manager of all time? Is it a Fergie? Is it a Johan Cruyff? Is it a Jock Stein? Is it a Brian Clough? The fifth one I put to you is the one that I select as what I think has got a really strong case when time, passes him by and he decides to hang up the old managerial hat. Is Carlo Ancelotti. I look at his record and I just cannot see past him as the greatest ever manager.
It's funny, we were talking about that last week. I was talking about in company with football fans on another continent last week. His name came up very, very strongly. And I was talking about... the thing about Ancelotti, you see, is that because he's managed big clubs, everybody thinks, well, he's had a free run at it, etc., etc. But what he does at big clubs is he manages to go in with all these huge egos and somehow make it all quietly work in a very downbeat way.
But some of these clubs weren't functioning properly.
Exactly. That's why he's brought in. He's brought into, and even Real Madrid dressing room famously for decades has been mayhem. And part of the job is to come in as that psychologist, psychiatrist, and get it all worked out. And Ancelotti seems to just come in and smooth everything over and get it done. I think if you take into what we were talking about last week from him, and actually goes, if you take into account player and manager and put them together, who's got this rounded great career? And Ancelotti stands at the very pinnacle of that.
And the only thing I would say, which is why it's so strongly leaning towards Fergie as well, is because to break the dominance of Glasgow and win a European trophy as well, and win another European trophy, and also at that point to win 3 titles, not just once in a one-off, to win 3 titles and then go down to Manchester, and with the grace of Bobby Charlton and some of the board members who understood what he was doing, he just dominates English football as well. It was just outrageous.
Utterly dominates it. To become synonymous with the dominant club. I mean, United grew a lot. United are always a big club, but they grew massively under him in terms of commerce, in terms of the size of the attendances. Old Trafford was transformed. Always an international club, but became a global club under Fergie. And he was able to kind of stride that, and also he was able to adapt as the game adapted from 86 when players were turning up pissed, and all the rest of it. He weeded out that drinking culture to 2013. The idea of a drinking culture at a football club at that level, which is utterly unthinkable yet. But Fergie was still winning the league. And by the way, his last league title was, no other manager would have won it. That was an old United team, guys that are well into their 30s, Giggs and Scholes and Ferdinand and all that. And when you've seen it, sadly from United's perspective, that when he left, they've gone like that, relatively speaking.
Absolutely. I mean, who gets your vote?
I would give it to him. I would also mention, I don't know if you mentioned Guardiola. I think Guardiola deserves enormous credit. I mean, it's 11 titles, it's 3 European Cups, and also Hugh's point, I mean, he's had an influence on football. He's changed the way other teams are playing football. Now, we all maybe resent this kind of playing out from the back, but when good teams do it, like City do and PSG and all the rest of it, it's magical.
The only thing I resent about that, Michael, is because people think he's reinvented the ball. He hasn't. What he's done is he has taken all the things that he learned from the master, for me, which was Cruyff. And Cruyff, adapted and put his own stamp off what Rinus Michels was doing. So Guardiola absolutely should be in that mention. Steen.
Absolutely.
Sir Matt Busby, Brian Clough with a provincial side in the second division.
This is my criterion. What goes against Guardiola for me, and there's nothing Guardiola can do about it, is that Guardiola's always had great teams and always had resources. So he's never done anything that he shouldn't do. Manchester City winning the Champions League. Whereas,
but you have to be good to stay in.
He also created what for me is the greatest ever club side in Barcelona, and I think there's an argument for it. 2009, 2011.
How much? Again, I'm talking against doubles. How much did he create? Inherited Messi, Xavi, and Iniesta. I'm saying that I could probably do quite well with those three.
I thought we could argue about this topic.
I never thought you put yourself up.
I'm up. I had a very, very good season in the Saturday morning league. Very difficult recruitment. Of course. You ever tried going on a scheme in a white van trying to get players
about the mind going, sir.
Just on that, and we mentioned Guardiola, Rinus Michels, and also Arrigo Sacchi, Del Bosque.
Yep.
Deserves it. Zagallo, Shankly, Mourinho, Bob Paisley, they all have it, and Miguel Munoz because of the early domination of Real Madrid in the 60s. Tam, who gets your vote?
Tommy McLean.
Yeah,
that's got to be it. Who was way ahead of his time, and see the amount of, and I mean that sincerely. A lot of the guys that played under Tommy, and a wee bit like some of the guys that played under his brother Jim. Didn't necessarily get on with him, didn't necessarily like him, but they realised what a great coach he was, And I remember having a long discussion, and you've had him in the show a few times with Ian Ferguson. And again, I can still see Ian's face tripping him when he get subbed by wee Tommy in the cup final. But Ian says Tommy was doing things, that it took a lot of other coaches, managers to catch up with. It took them years, and he was revered, and again, obviously I'm completely and utterly biased, but, I reckon he could still be the only manager that I'll see lifting a trophy for my team. So that's always going to be special. And if you think, what did he actually do? Again, provincial team, I know that some folk challenging that word, but for Motherwell, the one thing it always gets me is when we drew with Celtic in the cup semi-final, then the big thing that night, and the media were saying it, we were saying it going back in the minibus back to Motherwell for Hampden, is that you apparently don't get 2 bites at it with the old firm. That was the thing that said, that's it, now it's Celtics, it's Celtic's tie. And then, 4-2 in the replay, and his tactics that night, absolute genius.
The funny thing is, when you do have a serious conversation, suddenly he puts himself in as manager here. He reverts it down to Motherwell. Michael, I give you one next week when we talk about the greatest ever number 9s and we go through all the fantastics, the Gerd Mullers, the Lewandowskis. Willie Pettigrew will find his way into the discussion, and Bobby Graham as well. And of course, the other great thing is, just as we finish the programme, there was a great line from Michael, 2013, the culture of drinking for players had changed dramatically, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, 2023, the culture on European trips for journalists drinking has changed dramatically, hasn't it? Just, the old European trips used to be a joy, now they're rare.
Now they have to work.
Yeah, and now you're actually counting to think, is there enough to go for a drink? That's the other key issue of it. But listen, it's been an absolute joy. I thought we'd go down memory lane with you, Michael, and enjoy the Aberdeen thing. Thank you for watching the programme. We'll be back with the Journos next week.